55b2, the Mishnah on the bottom.
Yeah.
Okay, and we're going to try to finish the Masechta. So here we go. B'shalosh perakim b'shana, during 3 times of the year, i.e., the 3 pilgrimages, the 3 regalim of Pesach, Shavuos, and Sukkot, you call mishmarai shavos, all 24 watches of the Kahanim, the Mashmeris HaKahanim, were equal. As we know, there were 24, the Kahanim were broken into 24 family watches so that they served twice a year during the 48-week lunar calendar year. So they always got 2 chances. Now the problem, so each week had its own Kahanim, who was their turn to do the Avodah. Nonetheless, on the Shalosh Regalim, when all the Kahanim showed up, they became equal with some of the extra stuff that was done on those Yom Tovim. The Kahanim were equal, and they got an equal portion in them. So that's what it's saying over here. To be 3 times a year, all 24 were equal. In what? Be'emurei harigalim. Regarding the emurim, the sacrificial parts that come to the Kahanim that have to do with karbanos, with sacrifices that were deliberately being brought on the regel, on the yontif, on the holiday. V'chiluk lechem apanim, and the division of the panim breads. Now we know that there's the golden table that had the lechem apanim, that every week the lechem apanim, half of them went to the mishmah that was leaving, and half of the bread that went to the mishmah that was coming in, when they replaced it with new bread every Shabbos. But here we're saying that everybody else gets a piece of the puzzle. Ba'atzeres, if Shavuos should fall on Shabbos, Aymalai, the kind in charge of the distribution of the lechem, and of the Emurim would say, Heilach matzah, here is your matzah. Heilach chametz, here is your chametz. What are we talking about? The shtei alechem, okay? The shtei alechem were matzahs, cakes, but on Shavuos there's something called not the lechem aponim, but the shtei halechem. The shtei halechem were 2 special breads that were brought on Shavuos because of the grain portion of what Shavuos stands for, the agricultural part of the reason for the yontif. And those breads were waved around, etc., as part of their service, their avodah. And so those 2 breads also were shared with all the Kahanim. Now, the reality is that a lot of breads were brought. On Shavuos, there were the 2 special breads that were brought on top of the lechem apanim, which were matzahs. So we've got a lot of things going on over here. Hi, Jeff. How are you? Good morning. We just started the Mishnah. That's all we did. We're in the Mishnah.
Oops. Good morning, Yitzhak. How are you?
Good, very well, thank you.
Okay, perfect.
55b2, we're just going slowly through the Mishnah. We're about to turn to 55b3. The point of it is, remember yesterday we spoke about that there were 24 watches, 24 Ashmaris Kahanim. That means every family unit served twice a year in the 48-week lunar calendar. But besides the week that this Kaim had, on the 3 regalim, Pesach, Shavuos, and Sukkot, when all the other Kahanim were there, they got to share in some of the stuff, not just the one whose week it actually was. Okay? That's what our Mishnah essentially just said. Now, we're about to turn the page. Mishmah Shizmanoi Kavua, the Mishmah, the watch, 55b3, the watch whose time of service was fixed. In other words, this was his week, right? We said every Mishmah gets a week, 2 weeks. One week between Sukkot and Pesach, and 1 week between Pesach and Sukkot. But in short, so the Mishmar, whose week this was of the holiday, who Makriv, he offers that watch's offerings. In other words, the Tamid, All the regular sacrifices were offered by this mishmar. For an example, the tamidim, the daily tamid offerings, the nidarim v'nidavos, the vows offerings and the voluntary offerings, the shar kabanit tzibur, and all the remaining communal offerings, umakrid esakol, and this watch not only does the avodah, but he also goes ahead and offers up all of these sacrifices onto the mizbeach. So the regular mishmar, whose week it is, does the service. But in sharing the benefits of the service, the meats that the Kahanim were allowed to take, the 24 matnos Kahanim, the 24 presents that go to the Kahanim, that was shared globally to all the Kahanim who were there that week because it was the regel. And on the regel, on the holiday, on the pilgrimages of Pesach, Shavuos, and Sukkot, all the Kahanim show up, not just the Kahanim whose week it happens to be that it's their turn to do the service. Okay, let's learn the Gemara. So the Gemara, our Mishnah said that 3 times a year on Pesach, Shavuos, and Sukkot, it said, "Hayu kol mishmar Shabbos." All 24 watches were equal. The Emurei regalim, in the shearing of the Emurim of the festivals. The Emurim, of course, on the sacrificial parts. Frank the Gemara asked the Gemara, Emurei regalim, how could you mean that they get an equal part in the Emurei regalim, in the sacrificial parts of the regalim? By definition, sacrificial parts belong to who? Shall Givaya Ninu. They belong to the one up high, i.e. the Rabbeinu Shalayim's. They get offered on top of the altar, on top of the Mizbeach. That means so there's nothing to give out to all 24 watches. So what are you talking about? Amar Rav Chizda, Ma Shamo V'Regolim. What we're talking about is the Emurim of the special offerings that are offered on the holiday, i.e. the Oila Regel, the Oila that was brought in honor of the holiday, and the Shalmei Chagiga, and the Shalomim that was brought for the Chagiga, for the Shalmei Simcha, for the joy, to make sure that everybody had meat to eat on Yom Tov. Their Emurim do go to as presents to the Kahanim. Tanu Rabbanon, and again, if anybody's got any questions, feel free to ask. If it's not making sense, tell me. Tanu Rabbanon, how do I know that all 24 watches of Kahanim were equal in sharing the Emurim of the Chagim from the Shalmei, Chagiga, and the Oila Regalim? Talmud Laimo, Babachal Abbas Nafshay B'Sheres. The Torah says he should come with all his desire of his soul, then he should serve. This teaches that a Kohen may offer up sacrifices even if it's not his week of the watch. Any Kohen who wants to come with his full heart is allowed to serve. But if we use that pasuk alone, Yachal Af B'Shaya Moshe Shana Kain, I might have thought that meant all year long, even though we broke the Kahanim into 24 different watches, any other Kohen is allowed to pop into the Beis HaMikdash and do the Avodah. Talmud Laima, no. Me'achad shorecha, from one of your cities, says the Torah. Lo yamarti ela b'shor shekol Yisrael nichnas b'shar echad. I only said that all the watches are equal, that any Kohen who wants to come with a full heart to do the Avodah is allowed to come. This is only at a time when all of Israel enters through one gate. In other words, the time of the Regalim, when everybody comes through the gate of Yerushalayim to go ahead and come up to be Oila Regel. During all other times of the year, only the Kahanim whose week it is, the mishmar of that week, is entitled to offer up the sacrifice. Says the Mishnah further, the chiluk lechem aponim, and the division of the ponim breads. Now, again, there was the golden table. On the golden table, every Shabbos we put piping hot 12 breads, 6 on one side, 6 on the other. I mean, magically, they remain fresh all week long, and the next Shabbos, they would take off those breads and put in new breads. And the breads that they took off, 6 of the breads went to the Mishmar, whose week is ending, who just finished doing the Avodah, and 6 of the and 6 of the breads would go to the Mishmar, who is coming in. HaMishmar, the Mishmar HaNichnas, who's coming in now to do the Avodah. But we said on the Shalosh Regalim, on the 3 Regalim, on the 3 pilgrimages, all the 24 watches share in the division of the ponim breads. Okay, now one other thing, and remember, that's called the lechem aponim. On Shavuos, there's 2 extra breads called the not the lechem aponim, but are called give me a second, I'm drawing a blank. Are called give me a second. Why am I drawing a blank? The shnei alechem, are called the shnei alechem, the 2 breads. Those 2 breads were different than the other breads in that they were chometz, they were leaven, as opposed to the other breads which were put on the lechem aponim, which were not leaven. They were more like crackers, more like matzahs. So now we go. Tanu Rabbana, we learned in a brayso, minayin shkol hamishmoros Shabbos b'chiluk lechem aponim. How do I know that all 24 watches, when it came to the regel, if the regel falls out on Shabbos and we're taking off the old bread, that everybody gets not just the week, not just the mishma that's leaving, not just the mishma that's coming in, but all 24 watches get a piece of the lechem aponim. We're now on today's daf, 56a1. Says the Gemara, Talmud Laima, chelek kechelek yoichelek. The Torah says, portion for portion they shall eat. Kechelek avodah, kach chelek achila. Just as all 24 watches are equal in the service of the Beis Hamikdash during the regel, that they all could be involved in the oila regel and the shalmei chagiga, so too that they have an equal portion in the eating of the kayin shir of the offerings of the yontif. Umay achila. What does it mean in eating? If he will say to teach us that all 24 mashmoros have an equal portion in eating the kayin shares of the offerings that are brought specifically for the yontif, meaning the shalmei chagiga and the oila regels. This can't be mehasam nafka. We already learned that from a different pasuk. L'kayin hamakrib oisa loisia. It shall belong to the kayin who offers it. It shall be his. And since every kayin is allowed to offer up the special holiday offerings during the regalim, so it was an equal opportunity for everyone, not just the watches that it was whose week it was. So I know that they're allowed to have it. Hello, lechem aponim. We must be talking about the breads, the lechem aponim on the table, because that was not a regel, a yontif offering. The lechem aponim is an avodah b'kol yom, is a service of all year long. So that's the chiddush, that even though it's not a specific yontif's offering, it's the offering of the whole year. In Kol Zeh, all the kahanim, all 24 watches have a chelik in it, have a portion in it. Now says the Gemara, I might have thought, therefore, that even those regular offerings that are offered on the festival, but don't come on account of the yontif, right? In other words, like the tamid, like the everyday tamid shel baike, tamid shel beinu abayim. Every day they're brought. They happen to also be brought on the regel, but they're not brought because of the regel, because of the holiday. They're brought because they're an everyday offering. Talmud Loima, therefore the Torah teaches, Lavad mimachrav ala avos, except was transacted by the grandfathers. Ma machru ha'avos zeh lezeh. Now, what did our forefathers sell to each other? What mutual understanding did the Kahanim come to way back in the day when the Kahanim started serving in the Beis HaMikdash? Ani b'Shabbati le'ato b'Shabbatcha. I will serve in the Beis HaMikdash on my week, and you will serve on your week. There was a mutual agreement that they were being broken up into 24 groups, into 24 segments, the Kahanim, and each family unit gets 1 week to serve, and that week belongs to that specific family. So that means the stuff that's regularly brought during the everyday avodas of the year, or the special Shabbos, Musafs, or whatever, those go to the mishmar of that week, not for the global, even if your week happens to fall out on the holiday week and everybody's in town. These parts you don't have to share. The thing that gets shared is only the sacrifices that pertain deliberately just to the festival, i.e. the shlamim, the shamei chagiga, and the oilos sriya, and only oilos haregel. Only the oilers that you bring specific before the Yom Tif, and only the shalomim that you bring simply for the holiday to make sure that there's meat on the table. Says the Mishnah Vaita, Ba'aseres amaloi helech. But on Shavuos, if it falls out on Shabbos, he says to him, here is your matzah, and here is your chametz. Meaning, here is from the lechem aponim, and this is from the special shtei halechem breads that are brought on Shavuos. Again, they are brought on Shavuos, these 2 grain breads, because Shavuos is an agricultural holiday, not just the giving of the Torah. In fact, Minat Torah, the Torah does not connect Shavuos to Matan Torah. It connects it to the middle portion of the agricultural calendar. Said, so the Gemara now has a machlokes, and it will come around to our thing over here. The question is, what is the order of blessings? Do we say first the blessing on Sukkot on the Yom Tif, and afterwards say Shechianu? Or first do we say Shechianu, and afterwards for the holiday? So we go like this. Itma Rava ma Sukka v'achakak zaman. First one makes Kiddush on the first night of Sukkot, Mekadesh Yisrael v'azamanim, to sanctify Israel and its times, and then afterwards makes the bracha of Shechianu v'kimonu v'kiyonu lazman hazeh. Rabbi Bar Chana Amar Zaman, first you make Shechianu, v'achakach Sukkot, first you say the bracha of Shechianu, and afterwards you make the Kiddush, Mekadesh Yisrael v'azamanim. Rav Amar Sukka v'achakach Zaman, first you make the Kiddush on Sukkot, and only afterwards do you say Shechianu, Chayu v'diyayma adif. The obligation of the day takes precedence. The only reason why I'm saying Shechianu is because it's Sukkot. So Sukkot is the primary. And then afterwards I'll say the Shechianu. First I make Shechianu, and afterwards I'll make a bracha on Sukkot. Why? Because of the rule. What comes frequent, it takes precedence to what is infrequent. Obviously, we say Shechianu many more times during the year than we say the blessing of Mekadesh Yisrael v'azmanim with regard to Sukkot. Sukkot is only 7 days, and only really 1 day or 2 days at the beginning of Sukkot when we make Kiddush. Shechianu we make on every holiday. all year long. So it comes more often. We're now on 56A2. 56A2 says the Gemara, let's say that this machlokes of Rav and Rav Chanina, where Rav says, first you say of the Yontif, and then you say Shechianu. And Rabbi Baba Chana says first you say Shechianu, and then they make the blessing on the Yontif, is really a machlokes between Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel. The Tanu Rabbana, because we learned in a Brisa, Devarim Shmeim Beis Shammai Beis Hillel Besuda. There are matters concerning between Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel with regard to the meals. Beis Shammai Yoimrim Mevarech Alayayim, you make a blessing on the day. V'achakach Mevarech Alayayin, and afterwards you make the Bar Priya Gofen. That means first you make the blessing of Mekadish Yisova Zamanim, and then you make the blessing on wine. First you make a bar priya gofen, and then you make the bracha of Mekadish Yisova Zmanim. That's what we do. First you make the blessing of Mekadish Yisova Zmanim. Why? Because the day, because it's a regel, because it's a holiday, therefore we're making a blessing over the wine. So it's the day that causes us to make the blessing on the wine. Well, if that's so, then we make a blessing first on the day, and then afterwards on the wine. Okay? Ukvar, kiddush hayoim b'adayin yain loiba. And because the day has already become sanctified and the wine is not yet on the table. For an example, Shabbos. Shabbos comes in when the time arrives. We don't make Kiddush until an hour later. So the holiness of the day arrives before the time to make the Kiddush to sanctify the day. So that means the day should come before the Kiddush. Pretty logical. Beis Hillel, but Beis Hillel says what we do. Mevarech Alayayin, we make a blessing first on Bar Priya Gofen, and then we make this blessing on the sanctification of the day. Mekadish Yisov Azmanim, to sanctify Israel and its times. Why? Shahayayin Goyrim Lekiddush Shetoima, because the wine is causing the sanctification to be said. The sanctification is said over wine. That's the rule. Davaracher, birchas hayayin tedira. The blessing of wine is very frequent. You theoretically can make a bracha bar priya gofen every day of the year. Ubirchas hayayin eda tedira. And the blessing over the sanctity of the day on a holiday is not frequent. It only comes on Shabbos and on holidays. Whatever comes frequent takes precedence to something that's not frequent. So, if that's the case, Beis Shammai is of the opinion that the sanctity of the day takes precedence over that which is more frequent, because the day, its sanctification happens automatically well before you come to make a bracha. And Beis Hillel says, no, whatever comes with greater frequency overrides, takes precedence on what doesn't come as frequent. Therefore, should we say that Rav holds like Beis Shammai? Because Rav said, first you make the blessing on the holiday and afterwards on the Zman. So the Gemara says, Amalach Rav, no. I can even be saying according to Beis Hillel. Adkan over there, Lord come a Beis Hillel, because it only says because over there the wine causes the sanctification to be said. Over wine is the sanctification to be said. If not for the wine, Kiddush would not be said, and therefore the wine is more significant. Without the wine, there's no way to make the Kiddush. If the blessing of Zaman is not said, okay? All right? If the blessing of the Zman was not said, for an example, if you made the Shechianu when you built the Sukkah, before. Remember, there was an opinion that said you make the Shechianu when you build the sukkah, not when you first come into the sukkah. So let's say you hold like that guy. So you don't make like that Mandioma. So therefore, you made the Shechianu prior to Sukkot. So therefore, when Sukkot arrived, you weren't going to say Shechianu. If you don't say Shechianu, does that mean you're not going to make the bracha Mekadesh Yisrael Azmanim? You're not going to make the bracha sanctifying the day? Of course you would. So we see that the blessing of Sukkah is in no way dependent on the saying of Zaman. It's possible that in that case, Rabbi Basil would agree with Rav that the obligation of the day certainly takes precedence, because you got to sanctify the day whether or not you're going to say Shechianu. But Rabbi Chana would say, I can even state my opinion according to Beis Shammai. My opinion that first you say Shechianu and then Sukkot. What do you call it? Beis Shammai only says over there with the blessing of the sanctity of the day. The day is the thing that brings it in. The day becomes sanctified well before, like Shabbos. The day is sanctified well before you make Kiddush. So the day is already sanctified. So it's the day that is sanctified that causes us to make the Kiddush. Right? So therefore he says, therefore, what he calls, you make the blessing on the day before you make on the wine. But in this case, if let's say there is no sukkah, so for an example, Rashi says, if somebody is a wayfarer, a holchei derachim, he's on his way, on the road, he's patam in a sukkah. He's patam from a sukkah. In other words, if you're not settled somewhere, you're patam from a sukkah. You don't have to starve. But nonetheless, if you sit down to eat, even outside the sukkah, don't you have to make Kiddush? Of course you have to make Kiddush, right? It's no different than on Yom Kippur. If on Yom Kippur you must eat, if let's say your doctor and your rabbi say you must eat, well then you have to make Kiddush, because now you have a chiyuv of Kiddush. Same thing at sukkahs. If I can't sit in a sukkah because I'm on the road, okay, I'm on an airplane, I can't eat in sukkah. You don't have to starve on the trip. You eat, and you would make a bracha. If I didn't have the sukkah, would I not say Zaman? Would I not say Shechianu? Yes, I would. We're now on 56.8.3. So therefore we are. So we see that the sukkah blessing and the Zaman are not dependent one on the other. There are times when you would say the one on sukkah and you wouldn't say the Zaman if you said Shechianu before when you built the sukkah. Or flipped around, if you couldn't sit in a sukkah but you had to eat, you would say Shechianu. So therefore, Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel, it's not a proof that the machlokes of Rav and Rabbi Baba Chana has had anything to do with Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel, says the Gemara. Tanan, but we learned. Ba'atzeres on Shavuos, now we see how this is all coming back to our Gemara. Amalahi, he would say to him, the kohen that gives out the stuff, Hilach matzah, here's your matzah from the lechem upon him. Hilach chametz, here's your chametz from the shtei alechem that were brought specifically for Shavuos. V'hacha, the chametz iko matzah tofel. But now here, the chametz shtei alechem are the primary, because they're the mitzvah of the day, specific to Shavuos. While the matzah is less important, because in fact the matzah breads that were taken off the golden table were put on the table the week before. The matzah breads that are coming off the lechem aponim, that are coming off the golden table, were from last week, that magically was staying fresh and hot all week long. But nonetheless, that means its service, its avodah was done last week. The shtei alechem, the two leaven breads that are brought specific to Shavuos, today is their day of offering. Vikatani, and nonetheless, our Mishnah says, Heilach matzah ve'heilach chametz. First, here's your matzah, and here's your chametz, which goes to show that whatever comes frequent takes precedence over something that doesn't come as frequent. And obviously the 12 lechem aponim breads, which are done every week, is much more frequent than the once a year 2 leaven breads that are brought on Shavuos. To Yufta de Rav, it's a recreation to Rav, who says that the obligation of the day takes precedence. Amalach Rav would say, in fact, Tanoi, it actually don't take it so straight. It's a machlaik. It's Tanoim. It's an argument between the Tanoim. The Tanya, because we learned in the Baraisa, Heilach Matzah, the claim that's giving the stuff out, would say, here's your matzah, Heilach Chametz, here's your Chametz. So he would put the lechem upon him before the Shtei Alechem. In other words, the thing that came frequent before the thing that comes infrequently. Abba Sholema, just the opposite. Heilach Chametz, Heilach Matzah. Here's your chametz, here's your matzah. Because Abba Shol holds like Rav, that what? The obligation of the day takes precedence over what comes more frequently. Now, finally, we have our halacha. Darash Rav Nachman bar Rav Chisda, loy k'divrei Rav, dama Sukka v'achak zman. The halacha is not like Rav, who says first we make the bracha of Sukkah, and then afterwards we make Shechianu. Sukkah. First we make Shechianu, and afterwards we make the bracha on the Sukkah. What it can be, Kaddish Yisov Azmanim. The Rav Sheish is braided of idea of a Sukkah Ba'akak Zman. No, first you say Mekadosh Yisov Azmanim, and then you make Shechianu. And like the way we do it, the Hilkasa. Sukkah b'akak saman. First, we make the bracha of Mekadosh Yisov Azmanim, and afterwards you make the Shechianu. And that's the way we hold. So at the end of the day, we do hold like Rav. Very good. And again, this is how they formulated what we do today, by working out these machlokes and then paskening. Says the Mishnah further. Mishma shezmana kavua v'shar kabbalat tzibur. The watch whose week it is. In other words, whichever one of the 24 Bashmaris, this is his week. This is their week to do the avodah, to serve. It alone offers the tamid, the vow offerings, the voluntary offerings, and the remaining carbon tzibur communal offerings. So the Gemara says, "Li'asuye mai." What is this remaining communal offerings coming to include? Including the bull chatas brought for a communal error, and the goats brought for idolatry. Meaning, even though normally every day these kabbanis are not brought, so I might have thought these are special kabbanis, and just like the special sacrifices, like the Shalmei Chagiga and the Oila Regels are shared with all 24 watches, so too does the Par Helam Doritz and Tzibur B'Shiri Avodas Kachavim. The meat from them are shared with all the other Kahanim. Says the Gemara, no, and that's what our Mishnah is coming to tell us. Because these kabbanis are not brought because of the holiday, they're brought for other reasons where a communal error was made. That is considered part and parcel of the regular service of the Beis Hamikdash, having nothing to do with the Yom Tif. That's nothing to do with the Regel. The other Kahanim are not involved in it. Now the Mishnah said, "Who makar is a call?" And this watch, weeks it is, offers everything. What offers everything? La suye mai, la suye kayet samizbeach, including the dessert of the mizbeach. What's the dessert of the mizbeach? That after the carbon tamid of the morning is offered, what happens if there was a break in the action? There were no other carbons to be brought. For some reason, nobody was making voluntary offerings. Nobody was making promissory offerings. So they would have what was known as the desserts of the altar, so that the altar would not remain empty and having no avodah, idle, with no service taking place on it. They would pull out from the pen additional animals to be offered up as donative offerings. So therefore, since this is not a regular daily occurrence, I might have thought if it occurs on the holiday, all the other Gehanim should be involved in it. There's a Mishnah, no, because this has nothing to do with the holidays. It's not specific to the holidays. It has to do with any day where the Mishkan and the Mizbeach, the altar, is sitting fallow, is idle. We don't want it to sit idle. That can happen theoretically every day of the year. So it's in part of the everyday offering, and that belongs only to the ones whose week it is. Very good. Now, next Mishnah, 56a4. Yontev Samach l'Shabbos.
56a4.
56a4. Hi, Danny.
Hi.
56a4. Okay, we're up to the Mishnah. Perfect timing. The last Mishnah in the Masechta. So here we go. We're on the last stretch. Yontev Samach l'Shabbos. If a Yontev falls next to Shabbos, i.e., Bein Milfanel, Friday, Bein Lachreo, after it on Sunday. So now what's the problem? If the Yontif falls out on Sunday, it means the Mishmar, the watch of the previous week that normally would go home, is not going home because it's hanging around for the regel, for the pilgrimage. Okay? And if it's Friday, it's the same idea. They still can't get home. So, Bein Lachreu on a Sunday, Hayu Kola Mishmarish Shabbos Bechiluk Lechem Aponim. All the watches shared equally. Okay, we're equal. Okay, all in the division of the Lechem Aponim. Okay, in other words, in both cases, the Kahanim, who came to serve in the Beis Hamikdash during the Yontif, were compelled to spend an additional Shabbos in the Beis Hamikdash. So they said they have to spend an extra Shabbos in the Beis Hamikdash because they can't get into their cars and go home because Shabbos is right before or right after. Then the Chachamim said, that in that case, we got to change the rules. We got to compensate them for their extra time that they got to hang out. In other words, there's no such thing as something for nothing. Even the Kahanim who have to serve, if you got to make them serve an extra day, they got to get paid. Big lesson in life. Even if you got to do something, you're entitled to compensation.
I don't even know if they get as much as a kazayis, so that's lechem aponim.
That's the point, but we're going to get to that. If one day intervenes between them, okay? The first day of the Yontif is Monday, in which case there was a Sunday that intervened between the Shabbos and the Yontif, or the last day of the Yontif was Thursday, so Friday was the intervening day, right? So in that case, in addition to the regular watches, right, that were assigned to the service of that week, there was a large number of additional Kahanim. Because of the travel restrictions of Shabbos, if the Yontif begins on Monday, many of the Kahanim would already arrive on Friday instead of Sunday because they were afraid they wouldn't show up on time. So you show up a few days early. And if the Yontif was on Thursday, many of the Kahanim would remain because they said, if I stand up on Friday and there's a huge traffic jam, I'm going to get stuck on the highway for Shabbos. So when you had the extra day in between, whether Shabbos and Monday is Yontif, or Thursday is Yontif, and Friday and Shabbos is Shabbos, there was a lot of Kahanim hanging out, right? There was in between them. Mishmash Shazmani Kavua, the watch whose time it was, Kavua Yonaitel Esachalois would take 10 loaves of the 12 matzah loaves that were coming from the Lechem Aponim. 10 of them went to the watch whose week it is. And the ones that stayed behind would take 2. When the Shabbos was not on the festival, it was a regular Shabbos. So the Mishma HaYotzeh, there was a Mishma whose job was finishing, and a Mishna HaNichnas, and a Mishma whose job was just beginning. HaNichnas Noitel Sheish. The incoming watch would take 6 of the loaves that you were removing from last week's loaves that you put on. And the watch going out would take 6. Because obviously the watch that was going out had done the avodah at the beginning of the day, the beginning of Shabbos, and the mishmah that's coming in is doing the
avodah equally.
But Rabbi Yehuda, hanichtas naitel sheva. In fact, the incoming watch takes 7. Va'yoytze naitel chamesh, and the outgoing only takes 5. And the Gemara is going to explain. Hanichnasim cholkim b'tzofay. The incoming watch divides the lechem upon him in the north of the courtyard. What's so great about the north? The north is the place where the offerings were slaughtered. So the north is where everything began. The north of the courtyard is where the beginning of all the avodah, of all the service began with the slaughterings. That's where the rings were on the floor to pin down the animals, to slaughter them. And from there, everything would go from north to south. And the outgoing watch would be in the south, i.e. on their way out the door. They stopped to eat, and then they kept going right out the door. Bilga, the watch of Bilga, however, the watch of Bilga, la'olam chaykis b'darim, always divided the lechem upon him in the south. They were never allowed in the north. They were always told, you stay in the south. That means even though you're coming in to do the service, your service is going to look like you're already on your way out the door.
They were penalized.
The tabata kivua, its ring, like I said, there were rings that were amazingly, they were revolving rings going in a circle. The open side, and so the open side would be under the ground, but when it was time for this mishmar to do the services, they would take the animal, bring it to their ring, the ring to the open side. If you see the picture in number 43, stick the animal's neck into the ring, then continue to revolve the ring and close it up, and then they would slaughter. And this way the animal was pinned and they can do the slaughtering neatly and cleanly and humanely. Bilga, for reasons that we'll see in the Gemara, their ring did not revolve. It was cemented into the ground. In other words, it was unusable, and they had to beg the other mishmah that just left, that was leaving it, that they'd be allowed to use their ring, which was very embarrassing to them. The chaloina sesuma, and their alcove was sealed. As you know, around the Azara, there were a whole bunch of rooms. Each one, every mishmar had their own storage room, except Bilga's room was bricked up, was completely blocked off. So again, they had to beg and borrow to use space from the other Kahana. And the Gemara is going to get into it. We are now on 5685. Okay? We're just going to go a little overtime today, but just to get to the end of the Masechta. My milfanel, my lachrel. What do the terms before it and afterwards mean in the Mishnah? Right? The Mishnah over there, if you remember, the Mishnah says, Bein lefanel, bein lachrel, Friday or Sunday. If you see me before, it means the first day of the Yontif occurred before Shabbos on Friday. And after, it means the last day of the Yontif occurred after the Shabbos on Sunday. This can't be. Because this would be the same as a Shabbos during the festival, occurring in which we learned that all the watches share the lechem hapanim. So what's the case? Before it is the last day of the Yontif, i.e. the last day of the Yontif fell on Friday, and then came Shabbos. And after means the first day of Yontif fell on Sunday, Shabbos, and then came Sunday. My Tama, what's the time that all 24 watches share equally in the Lechem HaPanim when the last day of Yontif is Friday or the first day of Yontif is Sunday? Since when Shabbos precedes Yontif, these Kohanim have to arrive early and be in Yerushalayim by Shabbos, and when the Shema Shabbos immediately follows the Yontif, those Kohanim have to leave late and remain in Yerushalayim on the Shabbos. Either way, the mishma coming in or the mishma coming out ends up staying longer. Tiknu Rabbanim Nilsiki Ai the Nilchabadi Adodi. The Rabbanim arrange matters so that therefore they all eat the lechem aponim together, even though they only get a small portion of the lechem aponim. Nonetheless, the point is, if we force you to stay an extra day, and we mean the Torah makes it impossible for you to go home, you got to get compensated. We have to take care of you. Now,
actually, they wanted to stay because the lechem aponim, by eating the lechem aponim, it's a sgula to become rich.
Right. So that's the other thing. But im kol zeh that they wanted to stay, Daddy, that's from their point of view.
Right.
The Chachamim are not looking at it from their point of view. The Chachamim are saying the halacha forces them to stay in town.
It's staying there, yeah.
The halacha forces you down, even though you're going to benefit from it, it leaves a bad taste in the mouth when you're forced. So the Chachamim said, no, you're part of everything and you're getting an extra portion more than the thing. Again, it's all psychological in nature. Of people are people. That's it. You take it for granted. Now, the Mishnah said, the rest of the year, the Shabbases, when they were not Yom Tov, the incoming took 6 and the outgoing watch took 6. Rabbi Yehuda said the incoming took 7 and the outgoing took 5. We're now on Amid Beis, Nun Vav Amid Beis, 56b1. So it says the Gemara, according to Rabbi Yehuda, why does the incoming take 7 and the outgoing only take 5? What's the extra 2 loaves doing here? Why are they entitled to an extra 2 loaves? As compensation for closing the gates. Who opened the gates in the morning? The watch, whose watch is ending. But opening the gates in the morning is only half the job. You got, in the morning you open the gates. At night, after the Korban Shalbeno Abayim, after the afternoon Tamid, what are you supposed to do to those gates? You're supposed to close them. But that mishmar is gone. That's it. They're over. Because way back in the beginning of the day, when the Beis HaMikdash was established and the Mashmoris was established, the break was that halfway through Shabbos, the mishmar ends of the one from the previous week, and the mishmar begins with the mishmar next week. So the next week's mishmar is closing the gates for the mishmar that's leaving. No, you got to work so hard to close the door. Well, you got to be compensated with extra food.
Well, I have a question. Question. Two questions. Number one, each one did a half a job.
Right.
The other one opened up the door, and the other one. So why is one getting more than the other?
So
that's number one. But the second question is: wait a minute, that's not their job. That's your job and my job to open the doors. So the Levitim had to do it.
So the answer goes the other way. To answer your question number 2, that's wrong. The truth of the matter is, it's one job. You know the way the Svardim and the Lubavitchers do Hag B'Galila? One person does the Hag B'Galila. Jerry, right? The Lubavitchers pick up the Sefer, put it down on the bima, and roll it up themselves.
Right.
Thank you to Svardim. Because it's one...
But once again, somebody does, at that point he picks it up, sits down, and somebody does the other, in other words, puts on the garter and puts on. Once again, take the hagba, put it back down on the table, roll it up, sit down, and somebody else puts on the garter and puts on the mantle.
Got it. But at the end of the day, it's one thing, Daddy. So the truth is, opening up the gates and closing the gates is one avodah, and in reality, whoever opened it needs to close it. Okay? That is the full avodah. Otherwise, it's a half a job. Number 2, the whole thing is a misnomer. This week, the outgoing took 5 and the incoming took 7. That means the previous week, The outgoing, when they came in, took 7. And the other one took 5. So it always equals out anyways. And that's what the Gemara is going to ask. That is exactly what the Gemara is heading to. Why are we playing this game? It always equals out anyways. You start with 7 and you end with 5. So you end up with the same amount anyways. What's 7 and 5? 12. So you end up with the same amount anyways. So you might as well just do 6 and 6. That's where the Gemara is going.
Okay, but isn't that the job of the Levium to open the doors?
So that's a different, obviously, according to this man, the Amma, it's the job of the Kahana. That's a different story then. This, I believe, is the Shar Nikanor. And the Shar Nikanor may have been the job of the Kahana. Our job was the outside gates, surrounding the bay. We weren't that important, right? The name Alay Dal. Exactly my father's question. But let the outgoing watch say to the incoming, remove this from me and I'll remove it from you. In other words, it all equals out. This week was 7, last week was 7, this week is 5. Let's just go ahead. We'll work it out 6-6. Amar Abaya, this is the lesson in life. Baitzina Tova Mikra. A small gourd is better than a large gourd later. In other words, bird in hand is better than a promissory note in the future. I get what I get now. That's it, says Rabbi Yehuda. I'm not working things out. This is what it is. What I can get in hand over here.
That's what happens in Winn-Dixie. They say, oh, you got enough points to get $2. You want to take it now or you want to wait till it gets bigger? I said, no, I take it right now.
Exactly. Amar Rabbi Yehuda, the Musafim Chalkin. With regard to the Musaf, they divide as well. Just like the incoming and outgoing watches divide the Lechem upon them, they also divided the Musafs of each Shabbos. The outgoing watch performs the service of the morning Tamid and the Shabbos Musaf offerings. The incoming watch does the afternoon Tamid and the spoon of frankincense that's offered. The Ilu Musaf and Chalkin like Tani, and nowhere does it talk about dividing the Musafs. This Tana is not talking about division. He's just talking about whose job is what. Amarava, but the Bryce that was taught in the yeshiva, Shmuel does talk about the division. Umusafim Chalkin like Katani, and it doesn't talk about dividing the Mosifs. The Tana the Rebbe did the Shmuel, but the Bryce in the yeshiva of Shmuel goes like this: Mishmara Yaitze, the outgoing watch, performs the service of the morning Tamid and the Musaf's offering. The watch that's coming in, we're on 56P2, heading all the way to the bottom. What it called, then the incoming watch performs the service of the afternoon and offers the spoon of the frankincense. 4 Kahanim would enter here into the courtyard. 2 from this watch going out and 2 from this watch coming in. They would apportion the lechem upon him. It doesn't talk about splitting it. Tiyufta Rabbi Yehuda, it's a Tiyufta to Rabbi Yehuda. And in fact, it is a Tiyufta. And how is it done? So in other words, the Musafim were not split. The Musafim belonged to the outgoing watch because they did the Avodah, the service of the extra, the Musaf offerings of Shabbos. The incoming watch divides the Lechem upon him in the north, where the starting point, as we said, where everything begins. The incoming divides in the north to make it obvious that they're coming in to do the service. And the watch going out does it in the south to make it clear that they're the ones that are departing the Beis Hamikdash. Bilga li'olam chelekes b'darim. But Bilga was punished that he always divided it in the south, like he was always leaving. Even if it began his week, they wouldn't let him work in the north. The Tana Rabbana, there was a brayso, Ma'aseh of Miriam Bas Bilga. There was a story regarding Miriam, the daughter of the watcher Bilga, She'emira Dasa, who became an apostate. The Hilchas of Nisnei, L'Sadiot Echem Malcha Yavanis, and went and married an officer of one of the Greek kings. Because Shenichnis Yavanim Laheichal, in the time of Hanukkah, when the Greeks entered the sanctuary in the days of Matis Yov and Yochanan and Kohen Gadol, she kicked with her sandal the top of the Mizbeach and she said, Loikis, and Mosai Ata, Lycra, the wolf, how long will you consume the money of Israel? But you do not stand up for them in a time of their pressing need. Look, the Greeks are taking over the whole country. At the end of the day, of course, Hanukkah happened, and Baruch Hashem, we got back to second Beis Hamikdash and the whole story. When the Chachamim heard of this terrible thing, Kavu es Tabata, they permanently cemented down Bilga's ring in the floor of the courtyard, so it would be unable to be turned and used to place the animals in there for slaughtering. V'stamu es a chaloina, and they stuffed up, they sealed up their alcove, so that Bilga had to constantly borrow and ask favors from their fellow Kahana. The Yesh Oimrim Shemarta Shoyelovai, that the reason why they were punished was that Bilga's watch would be late in coming to the Beis Hamikdash when it was their week to serve. And as a result, Yeshav, his brother, in other words, the Yeshav family, that was the week before Bilga, would replace him and serve in his stead. They would do the Avodah of the Shabbos afternoon, even though that was already Bilga's time. They would do it, and therefore, they got punished. And although in general we have a rule, the neighbors of the wicked do not benefit from being in the proximity of the wicked. Shechine Bilga Nistavu. The neighbors of Bilga, that means the family of Yeshevev, did benefit. Shebilga li'olam chelekes b'darim, because Bilga was always penalized to separate the lechem upon him in the south. And that meant the Sheikhav Achim B'tzafai, and even Sheikhav, who was leaving because their turn as a mishmah was leaving, they still got the honor of eating their last meal of their week in the north. So it always looked like they were coming in to do the Avodah. It never looked like they were leaving, that they were on their way out. So says the Gemara, according to the one who says that they were late and that's why they were punished, that's why the whole watch was penalized. Miriam Bas Bilga. That the reason why they got penalized is because Miriam, the daughter of Bilga, became an apostate. Mishum de Bartik and Isalele Dide, because you penalized Bilga, the whole watch, because of the daughter. Amarabaya in, yes, Kidahamri Inchi, like people say. Shusa de Yunuka, Bishuka Oida Abuya Oidame. The utterance of a child in public are the views of either his father or his mother. Kids are tape recorders. What goes in comes out, and the sights that are taking place in the privacy of the home come out from the mouth of children. We are now on 56b3. 56b3. Says the Gemara, Mishom Avua v'ime kantina lekuli shemara, and because of her father and her mother, we penalized the whole watch. Now the Gemara says, Amar Abaya, Oy l'Rasha, Oy l'Shcheinai. Woe to the wicked one and woe to his neighbor, because the neighbor gets schlepped in with the evil of his neighbor. That's the way it works. We are going to stop right here. Amir Hashem, Rabbi Gibber has, if Jeff, did Rabbi Gibber talk to you? We're going to have the honor this time that Jeff Kaplan, who Baruch Hashem is about to finish his third Masechta, the Chut HaMeshulash, the third binding of the Masechta. Congratulations, is this time around going to do the Hadran. We're leaving over, if you take a look, the last words, Toiv l'tzadik, Toiv l'shchenenu. What's good for the righteous is good for his neighbor, because the righteousness moves on. The neighbor gets affected by the righteousness, as the pasuk says. So this is the end.